All right. Well, I don't know if I'm on the stage yet or not. I'm assuming I am. So, just want to start out with a quick question. How did the bad marketer get a job churning butter? He had a high churn rate, right? Yeah, I don't think I'm that funny either, but I thought I'd start out with that. But yeah, so today we're going to be taking a look at a real life Facebook ad account. I'm going to walk you through some things that I look for while I audit and show you some common issues that a lot of nonprofits are running to with Facebook ads. SOS Children's Villages has been extremely kind and is allowing us to audit their account and share all of these learnings with you guys. I do want to just preface who SOS Children's Villages is, so you have an idea of the type of nonprofit it is, so that when we look at the account, you can kind of adapt things and maybe change some of the strategy that I mentioned to fit your org. But SOS Children's Villages is the world's largest organization focused on ensuring that children without parental care or who are at risk of losing it grow up with the holistic support that they need to succeed. They strengthen families so they can stay together. They provide loving homes for children who lack parental care. They educate and empower children to reach their full potential. And they advocate for children's rights. Each year, SOS Children's Villages helps more than 1 million children and families in 138 countries and territories from around the world, including the United States. I believe Maddie from their team is going to be in the audience today, so a huge shout out to her. Again, thank you so much for letting us go through this account. We were super excited. I mean, it is a very standard ad account in comparison to a lot of the nonprofits we talk with. They are typically spending somewhere around $1,000 to $2,000 a month in ad spend. Year end, they typically do spend a lot more, like most organizations. But for time's sake, for today, we're going to really just focus in on their most recent campaign that they ran for Mother's Day, and then kind of walk through even the current campaign they have running, ultimately remarketing to those people. So we can go ahead and dive in, and I will share my screen if it's not already sharing. So I know in the Google Ads session it was like a little blurry, so hopefully it's coming across clear for you guys. But like I said, we're going to go ahead and dive in. So when it comes to auditing an account, one of the first things I always want to do is double check, are we tracking? Are we measuring things, right? As a marketer, it's important to test our ideas, but we can't really improve anything if we're not already measuring it. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to dive into the events manager, which you can do by going to all tools, and then you'll see something that says events manager, to kind of see are they tracking anything at all, right? That is the number one question. Are they tracking anything? And the second question is, are they tracking things correctly? So I can see that this organization, SOS Children's Villages, does have events that are up and tracking, but upon further review, if you go over to settings, you can come down here. I can see that it was set up through automatic events. This is definitely something that I would discourage most organizations from doing. It can be helpful if you really have no idea how to set up Facebook tracking through the pixel manually, but it's going to be really limiting, right? It is an AI, and while Facebook AI is really, really solid, it doesn't know everything about your organization and what's most important to you. And a lot of times as a nonprofit, we have so many different types of donation platforms that are trying to integrate with our site, and Facebook doesn't really understand that whole flow. And so what we end up seeing a lot of times is, Facebook will try to say, hey, I think people going to this site are adding, a donation to their cart they haven't checked out yet. And in reality, it's sometimes just a website page that mentions the word donate and isn't related to the donation page at all, not to mention a whole host of other issues. I always recommend setting up that tracking manually, especially nowadays where we're limited to only tracking 8 events. This is really important, right? So back in the day, we could track not necessarily an unlimited amount of events, but definitely a lot more than 8. And in the case of a nonprofit, right, there's so many things that you all are doing, and it's important to track all of them. But if we're limited to only 8, we do have to pick and choose. Just for a donation alone, I don't want to just see did people donate, but I want to see how many people did hit that donate page and add to their cart, or how many people added to their cart, but our donation form was way too long, and so they end up dropping off before they ultimately convert. That's super helpful data, but that alone is 3 events, and that's for one of my donation asks. In the case of SOS Children's, They have the single-time donors, they have the monthly donors, they have a child sponsorship program, they have an e-shop. If you're an organization that has volunteer opportunities, we do have to pick and choose. So that manual tracking is going to just give you a lot more freedom to like track the things that you actually want to track. Along the same lines over here, right above event setup, I can see that automatic advanced matching is on. This is definitely a good thing. Automatic advanced matching essentially just allows your website to communicate with the Facebook pixel and will tell Facebook that the people who clicked on these ads actually are on the site, and vice versa, to help ultimately allow your remarketing audiences, if you're remarketing to people that are on your site, work that way too. And then the last two things with tracking. So we talked about manual tracking setup, but even still with manual tracking in today's world with privacy, we're still losing a lot of data, right? And it was either March or April of last year, maybe May, iOS 14.5 came out, which created a whole host of issues for marketers, where it now allows individuals to opt out of tracking. And the numbers on that are really high. In the first couple of weeks of adoption, it was like 96% of people were opting out. That's crazy. But even today, on average, only about 25% of users are staying opted into tracking. And so what this means, right, is your ads can be hitting those people that opted out, but if they click on that and they go to your website and they donate, we're missing out on that data. So a lot of our campaigns will look like they're performing a lot worse than they truly are, which is really hurtful for optimizations, because we might be looking at a campaign and saying, it's not really getting a positive return on ad spend, or it's just like a one-to-one return, so I'm going to cut the campaign. But if we had that other 75% of data, we could have had a 2x, 3x, 4x ROI, and that would have completely changed our decision. So there are two ways around this. The best way would be through the Conversions API. If you're a customer of FundRaiseUp or Classy, I think they're either already launched or will be launching very soon a portal that's going to make setting up the Conversions API a lot easier. But in the case of SOS Children's, their donation platform was built in-house. It is something that's going to take a long time to, for your own in-house platform to figure out that integration. It could end up being months to even a full year of work in some cases. So in their case, CAPI is not going to be a possibility. The one thing that they could do, though, is something called offline conversions. And sorry, before I go to offline conversions, just to give more context on CAPI, essentially what it's doing, right, like with the iOS issues, it's making the cookies not work anymore. So if they've opted out, they click on the ad, they go to the website. Facebook can't tell that they do anything on your website. However, if they donate, they're giving your donation platform their first name, their last name, their email, the donation amount, et cetera, et cetera. And you're going to CAPI is going to automatically send that information over to Facebook. It's going to cross-check, and then Facebook has the first-party information. And if Facebook knows that the person who just donated is also someone that they served an ad to, it's going to give you some of that attribution. It's definitely not 100% of data, but it is certainly a lot more than if we weren't to have it. But again, if CAPI is not an option, you can do that in a more manual process through offline conversions, where on a weekly basis, you download all of the donors from that week from your database. You're going to upload that as a CSV to Facebook, and then Facebook's going to do that exact same process. It's not as great just because you're typically it's not going in as fast, and we don't have that long of an attribution window for it. But in our case, we typically see at minimum about a 35% increase in donation data. But in sometimes we've had upwards of 100% increase in that data. So from a tracking side, those are super foundational, but it is extremely important because, again, I can't look at any of these campaigns and tell you the success based on the donations. I'm making all of my audit suggestions today based on clicks, cost per click, cost per impression, cost per view, which is good. That's a general health metric, but the ultimate metric that we should be looking at if we're running donation-focused campaigns is ROI. So I am going to go back to the ads manager now. So that was in the pixel area, or the events manager. Now I'm back to the ads page. And then I'm going to just sort this so it's a little bit easier for me to read through. So we'll sort by spend. So first, we're going to dive into the campaign structure. This is less crucial feedback, but it could end up being really helpful for some of you. When you create a new campaign, right, you're forced to immediately create a campaign title. a lot of times, right, like we just put in, like in this case, right, all of them were a Mother's Day campaign. So we created all of these different campaigns called Mother's Day, but most of these had the same goal in mind, and then we're using the same bid objectives. So there's multiple traffic focused goals that all have the end goal of getting people to donate. I recommend using your campaigns as more of a folder. So if you're using the same bid objective, like this Mother's Day test audience display, and this Mother's Day test audience display probably could have been linked together into one ad or one campaign, which does make optimization a little bit easier. It's not the end of the world if you want to do it this way. Like some people like a messy room, that's okay. But it is something that I do recommend, like really trying to categorize your campaigns a little bit more. And then the other thing here, right, at the campaign level, it's where we're choosing our bid objective. And all of these campaigns are using something called campaign budget optimization, which is a feature right here. So essentially they're telling Facebook, hey, I want this campaign to spend a total of X amount of money, or I want this campaign to spend $300 a day, whatever it might be. But they're going to create multiple different ad sets targeting different audiences. Campaign budget optimization is going to look at the data in those first couple of days of those ads running. And if we're telling Facebook to optimize for the most amount of traffic possible, sometimes ad sets get an unfair representation based on their audience size. So if I were to actually dive into this campaign and look at these ad sets, I'll sort by the ones that were spent the most. We can see that Facebook ultimately chose child development and human rights audience as the best audience and put way more of the budget there than anywhere else. So top 25% income mothers ended up getting cut off fairly early. Father and Mother's Day got cut off early. Lookalike ran a little bit longer. But what's funny, right, is like the ultimate goal here is getting people to click on the ads. And if you look at data around, let me sort by performance and clicks. If you look at data on like the cost per click, child development and human rights actually ended up being one of the more expensive cost per clicks, where something like top 25% income mothers got cut off early, but it had one of the lowest cost per clicks. And a lot of that comes down to audience size. So the larger the audience you're targeting, and we're going to come back to this in a second, the larger the audience you're targeting, the cheaper your cost per impression becomes, the cheaper a lot of times like the ability to reach people is obviously bigger there as well. And so if we're telling Facebook, hey, I want the most amount of people to see this as possible, I want the most amount of clicks as possible, it's going to favor the bigger audience. And if you have a smaller, more defined audience, it's just not going to get a fair chance. And I can open that up and even just show you guys like the audience size here. So this one was the biggest. It was like 4.8 to 5.6 million people in these general interests, where the one that ended up getting cut off was down here is like 4.4 million. And I think the other ones that cut off were a little bit lower too. So 4.2. And then this one had about 2.2. So again, they get cut off a little bit early, and you're not actually giving your stuff the ability to optimize correctly. I recommend turning it off and optimizing yourself, looking at the data you want to look at, giving them a fair chance. But if you don't have that time, or that's not something you have the staff capability for, then that is what campaign budget optimization is for. You will just end up you're wasting more ad spend that way, especially as you scale. If you're spending $10,000 a month, $20,000 a month, it's really going to affect the success of your campaigns. So that was campaign budget optimization. And then the other thing here too, right, is on these campaigns, their end goal is donations, but the only campaign objectives they were ultimately using were video views and traffic. And those are great campaign strategies. I do recommend them. But if you do have tracking set up, and they couldn't have used conversions in this case because it would have been giving them the wrong data. But if you do have conversions tracking, I do recommend using a conversions-based campaign, because essentially what you're doing is you're saying, hey, here's the area I want to target. Here's the audiences I want to target. I want you to specifically focus in on people who are in that audience that have probably already purchased off of a Facebook ad before, or are highly likely to purchase based on whatever information Facebook has on them. It's a little bit more expensive per person reach, but you end up reaching the highest quality audience. Community Boost or conversions campaigns are by far the ones that carry the most amount of revenue and ultimately carry the return on ad spend for the account when targeting new audiences. I don't recommend using a conversions campaign typically for a remarketing audience, because you've already qualified them as being ready to buy. But, again, some general feedback there. I think they have tested other stuff in the past, but for this specific campaign, it was really limited to just those two campaign objectives. So going into the audiences, let's see here. Okay, so I'll go back to those ad sets and pull one up again. Sorry, let me go back here and sort. Okay, so going back to these audiences, right? A lot of these were really, really large audiences. We're talking 4 million people plus, which is not necessarily a bad thing, right? The bigger the audience, again, the cheaper a lot of this stuff becomes. However, at Community Boost, we've typically found the sweet spot for most nonprofits for their audiences to be as low as 100,000 people, but typically we like to have audience sizes of about 300,000 to 450,000. The smaller your audience is, the more expensive it is per person reached, but you're balancing that against like finding a higher quality person in that. So we can layer these audiences a lot further. And in this example, I do like how they set up their audiences. They're doing multiple layers of matching. So a lot of nonprofits will come in here and they'll set up one audience of like just people who are interested in community issues, where in this case, it's like people who are interested in community issues and are parents and don't have their education level stopping at high school. If that's the case, then, or maybe it's that their education is in high school, they don't want to target those people. That's great. But again, we're targeting 25 to 65-year-olds. Is there a difference in what a 25-year-old is going to find compelling versus a 65-year-old? So there's always ways to narrow down that audience. You don't want to get too small. If it's 10,000 people, the cost is going to go way up, and it's probably not going to balance out with having better information. But I do think that, at 4 million people, there's probably ways that we could narrow this down a little bit further. And that's definitely something I would take note of. You can go in and check your audience sizes pretty easily and try to make sure you're within that range. And if you're above it, try to add in some other layer of interest or age or gender or location. All of those things really matter. I'm going to jump out of this campaign and quickly go to their current remarketing campaign. And along the same lines as what I was saying with like, you don't want an audience that's too big. You also don't want an audience that's too small. So this campaign right now is remarketing to all of the people that were interacting in some way with them over the last 180 days. So we have an audience targeting people who viewed the Mother's Day videos that they were running on Facebook. We have people that have visited their website in the last 180 days, people who have interacted with Facebook in any way with them in the last 180 days, but they're separated into 3 different audiences. And I mean, the overall audience size is definitely not within that 300 to 450,000 ideal range. And so what's going to happen here is all of these ad sets were overpaying for delivery. And one of the things that I would recommend if you have smaller remarketing audiences would be to combine these 3 into one specific one. Naturally, too, like the ads that they're running towards the Mother's Day viewers and the ads that they're running towards the Facebook engaged people are really the same, which is the only reason why you wouldn't want to put them all in one ad set. So, for example, if they were doing Facebook engagement, website visitors, Mother's Day video viewers, but they also had a list of like people who've donated in the last 60 days, I wouldn't combine all of those together. I would at least separate the donors because you're going to talk to them a different way. But I do think that's another thing that probably could have saved a bit of money. And then one other thing that I did notice as I was going through this account is on the placement side of things, right at the ad set level, we choose where our ads are going to get placed. In Facebook, it's not just like 2 placements. It's not just Facebook or Instagram, but within each of those, there is a huge variety of placements that we can do. Out of this most recent campaign, the only placements that I saw were on Facebook, and most of them were just specifically for the Facebook newsfeed. Really nothing was on Instagram. I do recommend always trying to advertise both on Facebook and on Instagram. When you're looking at those audience definitions and it's telling you, hey, there's 80,000 people or there's 100,000 people in this audience, that is looking at all Facebook networks. So if we cut out Instagram or something like that, we're actually losing out potentially on a big section of the audience. And because we are targeting 25 to 65, while you're going to get a lot of 40 to 60 on Facebook super active, and you might get some in the 25 to 40 range, you're going to find way more 25 to 40 active on Instagram. So I don't recommend putting those both in the same exact ad set, right? Like you could click on Facebook feed and Instagram feed, which is okay. And we do that at times as well internally if the ads feel like they can fit the vibe of both. But they are different platforms. Facebook, you're going to get more people to read your copy. On Instagram, it's all about the image or the video that you have. You're going to get way less people to read that copy. So, but the fact that we weren't targeting Instagram at all, I think probably limited SOS Children's Village from full success. And then finally, we're going to dive into the ad level. Ultimately, I actually really liked the ads that were created here. I felt like they were extremely mobile optimized. I pulled quite a few of these up. Sorry, this is on the remarketing campaign. Let me go back to this one. I pulled them up on my phone. Most of them, I didn't even have to click like see more. It showed me everything I needed to see once it loaded. That's great. And there was A/B testing going on. They were testing the different images, which is great. But the one thing I do have feedback on is while the A/B testing was good and I felt like the copy was pretty good, there wasn't any testing of that copy. It was only testing of the imagery. So all 16 of these ads is going to say every child deserves to feel the warmth and comfort and joy of a parent, et cetera, et cetera. It's the same for all of these. And that call to action is the same for all of them as well. And it's important to note that what is going to be compelling to the Father's and Mother's Day interest audience versus the look like 1% of your current donors versus the top 25% of income demographics, it's going to be different. So yes, it's important to test our images, but it's really important to test that copy to see what is going to resonate with different audience segments. And with the call to actions, this is like a community boost anecdote. Donate now is great because that is your ultimate goal, is to get them to donate. But we found that learn more as a call to action actually gets a lot more engagement, which, the conversion rate is a little bit lower because of people maybe not wanting to donate. But ultimately, we actually see higher overall return through a lot of times those learn more call to actions. It's not every time, but that is something that I think would have been really interesting to test in this scenario. So I know it's a super high level overview. This is a quicker session, and I want to make sure we have time for Q&A. So I think we're going to go ahead and invite Chloe out here, who's going to help assist in answering some of those questions. If you are interested in potentially working with Community Boost on Facebook and Instagram, you can schedule time with us. We'll do one of these audits for your account specifically and set up a strategy. If you're not interested in working with Community Boost and you just want to go to the summit and stuff like that, that is totally okay. We will also, if it's not already been posted in the chat, we will be sharing with you guys a link to an audit guide to allow you to do an audit on your own. And I think a poll will come up pretty soon, again, if it's not already, to give you guys those options. And yeah, I'll go ahead and stop here and open it up for Q&A.
Awesome. Sounds great. And your poll is up. We're good.
Awesome. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Looks like Grace wants to know, should we manage or create event setup and advanced matching before we add the Facebook pixel to our website? Or add the pixel first and then create the event setup, etc.?
So a little bit of both. So when you initially create the pixel, that is when you're going to turn on the advanced matching. So that's all going to kind of happen at the same time. From there, what I would do is put the pixel on site. That way you know which events you're wanting to track before you are going through all the event setup, just so you don't have to do it again. But ideally, these are all happening around the same time. They don't take a super long time as individual pieces. So ideally around the same time, but it's not super important for the order of operations.
Awesome. And then Grace also says, sorry, do you or do you not recommend campaign budget optimization?
And I realize I might have made that a little confusing because I did kind of say it's good for both things. Personally, we do not recommend campaign budget optimization because, we're an agency, right? We're spending a lot of time in the accounts. The manual adjustments are going to be way better in the long run. If you are in a space where you truly can't afford an agency or you can't afford someone to be in that account every single day, campaign budget optimization is certainly better than nothing. You're just not giving all of your ad sets a fair chance. And so what could happen is, you have one ad set and it's doing well, like Facebook is going to choose an ad set that's doing well, but you're losing out on the ability to have potentially had another ad set do better just because the audience size was smaller. And that's not a very fair A/B test at that point.
And one thing with CPO as well is that if you are in the position where you are having to run with it on, there is the ability to add in like a minimum ad set spend. So if you are able to go in and set that minimum, that way you aren't having one ad set eat up all of the budget. There is a set amount for each one that can be helpful too if you're in the position where you have to have it on.
Got it. Okay. And one more question says, how regularly should we be going through and auditing, iterating, and optimizing our ads?
Yeah, so when it comes to optimizations, our rule of thumb is at least once per week. I do go through and generally recommend an overall refresh about once a month, just because once you do get to those optimized ads, that's great. But if people are seeing the same ones over and over, they're going to stop resonating. So from here, if it is an evergreen campaign, you can really build on what's already working and go in and refresh them about once a month.
Yep. And I would say too, I mean, it's going to depend on your overall ad budget. If you're spending $1,000 a month and you're in there once a week, that's great. But you're spending $10,000 a month, like that's the amount of learnings in 1 month or 1 week that you would have potentially had over multiple months. So, it's going to depend. I would say if you're really only spending 500 to 1,000, once a week would be the bare minimum. It still would be helpful to be in there a bit more. But if you're spending 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, like our general rule of thumb is we want to spend an additional hour a week for every additional $1,000 you're spending. So, again, we have those organizations that spend $40,000 to $100,000 a month in ad spend. That does look extremely different than if you're spending $500.
Definitely.
Awesome. Well, we have a couple more minutes for some Q&A time. So if anybody has any more questions, even if they're specific to your org, anything that we can try to help you with, help to provide some more insight for you, we have a couple more minutes to do so. So we'll open it up to any questions or chats. Let's see. Lisa just chimed in. She says, what's the lowest possible monthly budget to have any impact?
It depends, I think, what your campaign goal is, because the lowest budget for a conversion campaign is going to look much different than, say, like a video views. And so it's definitely going to vastly differ by campaign. I would say you need to be spent at least, I believe the minimum is $1 per day when you are launching new ad sets. And so at least $1 per day in every audience you are testing. But when it comes to a conversion campaign, if you aren't able to put enough budget behind it, I wouldn't expect it to perform very well. So if you don't have, I would say anything below like four or 500 maybe in a conversion campaign, at a certain point, you're just not going to see the conversions through. And so you would be really kind of throwing your budget into a hole that could be going somewhere else. So I would say it can be a bit lower for an engagement or a video views campaign, but those impressions and clicks do get more expensive depending on your campaign goals.
All right. And a question from Grace. She asked, do you have nonprofit recommendations that offer excellent visual Facebook ads we can look at for inspiration?
One of my favorite tools that Facebook offers is actually the Facebook ads library. So what you can do, if I can try to pull the link, but if you just Google Facebook ad library, you can go in and search pretty much any organization you want to see and see what ads are actively up and running for them. This isn't just for nonprofits, it's really for any organization in the space. So that's a really good tool to use when you're first starting to write your own ads, just to see what else is going on.
Awesome. Yeah. And so another question, how many ads at a minimum should we run in each campaign?
Yeah, so as a best practice, we usually say at least 3 or 4 ads per ad set. And so that's really going to depend on how many different ad sets or audiences you have running. But that's not to say all of these ads need to be completely different. Say you only have 1 or 2 images, but you want 4 iterations. You can switch up a headline. You can switch up the primary text. And that can really increase your overall number of iterations, but generally at least 3 or 4 per ad set, because we really never know which ad is going to be the one that gets picked up and does the best. So giving Facebook as many options as we can to have a successful ad is the best way to go.
Awesome. Well, if you're looking to get that Facebook and Instagram audit worksheet that Reagan mentioned, it is in the chat. You can open that up. It's a Google Doc, so you can make a copy of it and start writing in it and try to, look at different things you can do to optimize your own ad accounts. So that is right there in the chat for you.
Sorry,
looks like
Grace just asked another question too.
Yep.
I can quickly answer. So you had asked Grace how many. So yeah, someone had asked about how many ads per ad set, and then how many audiences should we have per campaign. Again, that just totally depends. I would say at least two, just because you might have an idea of what's going to be good, and like you could test something else, right? Like there's different types of audiences. So let's say you're trying to find new people. There's 2 ways that I would recommend to do that. You can do interests, where you're looking at Facebook and saying like people who are interested in, like let's say you're a humane society. Like I want to find dog lovers. I want to find cat lovers. I want to find people who follow other humane societies. That's a good place to start. That's an interest audience. Or you could do a lookalike audience, which you're actually taking a list of your current donors. You're uploading that, Facebook scanning all of their profiles, trying to find what they like and what they have in common, and it's going to create new people that way. I would say at minimum test both of those, because sometimes interest audiences way outperform your lookalike of your current audience, and vice versa, and you're never going to know. But 2 at minimum, 3 or 4 is great. But every ad or audience that you add, you're having to then go and create hopefully 3 to 4 new ads. So it depends on what you have the ability to then follow up on and optimize, and what you have the bandwidth for the ad creation side, right?